Hi guys, Jason here at wavtech, and in today's workshop we're going to go through how to program the IRAD Plus. So the IRAD is a really unique accessory that actually does quite a few things that are necessary for everyday installations that you generally don't have a solution for, if at all, but also it can make life a lot easier. So let's talk about what those main things are. So the IRAD Plus is a patented technology that gives you really three main things that are important for everyday installations. It's an automatic ignition generator, it's actually a switch trigger isolator and generator, and it's also an automatic relay solenoid control device. So talking about the automatic ignition generation, which is really the primary function, it gives you the ability to generate a switch trigger from just power and ground in any vehicle. By programming the device to know when the engine is started and then when the engine is off, you can get a true ignition from any power source in the vehicle. So this will save you a lot of time from trying to find the switch trigger in a vehicle that may not even have one. It's also a switch trigger generator and isolator, so it gives you the ability to generate a 12-volt trigger off of any 5-volt or more, either pulsed or DC trigger, without putting any load on the source. So it's perfect for sensitive electronics and also for sources that may not be already a true 12 volt where you can't use a relay with. And then lastly, it's an automatic relay solenoid control device, which gives you the ability to automatically separate auxiliary batteries from the main battery. And this is really important for stop-start vehicles when you're putting in large systems that are going to power cycle every time the engine cranks and the starter drops the battery voltage and causes your amps to power cycle. So this will totally isolate the system and alleviate that. And on top of that, of course, it has some really cool features such as adjustable turn on and off delays. You can actually reverse the turn off order, so that gives you the ability to completely solve any turn on or turn off pop. And as a big upgrade to the original IRAD, not only some of these features, but also it delivers about 4 times the output current of the original IRAD. So it can produce over 3 amps continuous per output or 6 amps in parallel, which is enough to drive most small electronics directly, including radar detectors, dash cams, and rear seat entertainment. So the IRAD Plus, as I mentioned, has 3 core features. One of them is the ignition generation, and to program that is really simple. Like I said, it's a 1-minute process. So all you do is connect to power and ground anywhere in the vehicle and simply start the engine. Start the engine and press and hold the ignition program button for 5 seconds. And the engine is started, so I'm going to increase the voltage here. And it's going to learn that voltage. It's going to actually take an average. So even though I started a little bit low, it's going to take an average of that voltage over 30 seconds, and then it's going to decide what your turn on threshold is afterwards with an algorithm compared to the engine off voltage. So we'll give it the full 30 seconds here. And when it's done, it's going to turn solid. Okay, so now it turned solid, and that means that it's finished learning the engine running voltage. So next thing you do is just turn off the engine. So I'll just simulate that here by turning down the voltage. And most batteries will hold a float charge for a little bit. You can make that go quicker if you turn on some headlights or whatever, but generally you don't need to because it's going to take an average. And then you just short press the ignition program button when the engine's off, and it'll learn that average voltage over those 30 seconds. And when it's done after 30 seconds, it will go solid and then turn off, and then you're done. Every time after that, you start the engine, and it's going to give you a switch trigger output from true ignition. Okay, so that's it. Literally a minute, and it's programmed now. So every time you start the engine, and we'll just simulate that here again, there you go. You get both outputs automatically. Now, I haven't set any delays or anything like that, so they're both going to come on simultaneously, but they do have independent delays, and we'll get into that separately. But simple as it can be, 1 minute programming, true ignition output. Okay, next is switch trigger mode, which actually can operate together with ignition detect mode. That just simply means you input a switch trigger of any type, like I mentioned, any DC voltage 5 volts or more, or even pulsed and sine wave triggers 5-volt peak or more. And simply by triggering a switched input to the remote in, it does the same thing as ignition generation did. Now, again, I haven't set any of the delays or the order yet, or minutes or seconds, but just simply flipping the switch here gives me both outputs. So you can see there I actually had a little turn off delay, but that's what it does, and it will override the ignition detect. It'll keep it on if you decide to turn off the engine, so you can activate it with a separate trigger such as accessory, or you can turn it on independently even without the engine running. So along with the ignition detect mode and the switch trigger mode, both of those can utilize delays, and the turn on and turn off delays are going to be important for things like, you've got a varying battery voltage and you don't want it to shut off on you, or it's a stop-start vehicle and you don't want your trigger going away every time the vehicle stops. So you can add delays in seconds up to 10 seconds, or delays in minutes up to 10 minutes. And you can add those turn on and turn off delays in seconds or minutes to either output independently. So you might want your ignition output to stay on longer than you would your remote output. So we're going to start with turn on delay, and this again is really easy to program. So we've already programmed the thresholds for ignition detect mode. It's already ready for turn on and turn off just by flipping the switch. But now we're going to set the turn on delay. So simply press whichever output you want to adjust the turn on delay for, either the ignition or the remote. We'll start with the ignition, and I just press it once, and while it's flashing, that means it's ready to take input. So I'll just push it twice for 2 seconds. The default is in seconds. And after not touching it for 5 seconds, it'll time out. It'll flash back twice, indicating that it's taken 2 seconds. And now when I turn it on, 1001, 1002, 2 seconds of turn on delay. Now I didn't set any additional delays for the remote output, so that means it's going to come on at the same time as the ignition output does. Okay, so now we've got the turn on delays, but no turn off delay. So they both turn off instantly with either the ignition detect mode or the switch trigger mode. So now I want to set some turn off delays. So let's start with the ignition out. So instead of pressing it only for 1 second, you press it for 2 seconds. Not more than 5, but about 2 seconds. So just press and hold, and then release. And while it's flashing, I'm going to put in 2 seconds of turn off delay. Okay, and then it'll flash back twice. Done. And I'm going to do the same thing for the remote. I'm just going to press that for 2 seconds, release, and just press it once for 1 second. And when it's done, it'll time out. Okay. So now I've already programmed some turn on delays and now some turn off delays. So let's see what happens. So I turn it on, and they both come on at the same time because I only programmed ignition turn on for 2 seconds. And now when I turn it off, I programmed different delays. So the ignition is going to turn off first, followed by the remote after 1 second. So you can see where this is going. You can stagger those, you can extend them to any application you need, but very simple. Short press gets you turn on delay, 2 second press gets you turn off delay for either output, ignition or remote. Okay, so now we understand how to program turn on and turn off delay. You can choose whether those delays are in seconds or in minutes. By default, they're already in seconds, but if you want minutes, which is most often going to be on turn off delay, like I mentioned for stop-start vehicles, let's just go ahead and do that for ignition out, and let's set it to 1 minute of turn off delay. So I'm going to press and hold that for 2 seconds and release, and now it's in that mode, and then I'm going to press and hold it for 5 seconds and release, and it's flashing slowly to indicate that now it's in minutes. Okay, so now every time I turn it on, it's gonna do the same thing because I left that in seconds. But when I turn it off, it's gonna stay on for a minute. And then after that minute is expired, it's still gonna have that 1 second of delay for the remote out after that. So whatever you set it at, that's the first one and then the second one. Okay, so now that I have decided what my delays are going to be, the next thing is if you need that reverse turnoff order. So that's going to be really important for situations where you have a pop noise, and that can be a turn on or turn off pop noise. Basically, you always want the source to turn on first because that's what's generating those pops, either during boot up of a factory radio or an aftermarket radio. So you want the radio on first, but not the amplifier yet. So you want to turn the radio on first and then the amplifier. And then on turn off, the opposite is true. You don't want the amplifier amplifying the radio's turn off pop or shutdown noises. And so you want the amplifier to turn off first and then the radio. So to reverse that turn off order is really simple. It's controlled by the remote program button, and you just need to get into the turn off programming mode, just like I did for the turn off delays and also for the seconds and minutes for the remote output. So I'm just going to press and hold the the remote program button for 2 seconds and release, and then I'm going to press and hold it for 10 seconds. And now you see the flashing order. It flashed the blue first for the ignition, for the remote, and then the red for the ignition. So that means now it's going to turn off in reverse order. So I'm going to turn it on. They both come on at the same time, and then I'm going to turn it off, and you can see the remote went out first. Here, let me just add a quick turn on delay for each one. So let me do that again, just to show you that again. I'll do the turn on delay for the ignition. I'll just press it once, just so you can see more distinctly what the LEDs are doing. It's going to flash once, and then I'm going to do the same for the remote. Short press it for turn on delay, press it once for 1 second. Okay, so now that's done. All right, so I've reversed the turn off order, and I've got 1 second of turn on delay on each output. So I'm going to turn it on. Ignition first, remote second, turn off, remote first, ignition last. So there you have it. That's basically all the settings you need to do for typical applications, and there's a couple more that I'll get into in a little bit. So now that we've done all the main stuff, the basics, the ignition detect mode, switch trigger mode, the delays, the reverse turn off order, there's one more main mode, the third main mode, which is relay solenoid control mode, and that is basically only for stop-start vehicles where you need that auxiliary battery to be separated from the main battery every time the starter cranks and that voltage drops so much that it causes your amplifier system to cycle. So by isolating that auxiliary battery every time the engine is off, it will never see that starting cranking voltage drop. So let's go over here to another demo, and I'll show you how that works. Okay, so this is to demonstrate the third main use case for the IRAD Plus, which is Relay Solenoid Control Mode, or RCM. RCM is basically same as ignition detect mode, so you would program the ignition thresholds just like I showed at the beginning, but you want it to automatically separate the two batteries using this solenoid controlled by these relays. The reason for the relays is, even though the IRAD Plus has 3 amps of output per output, some of these solenoids can draw more than that on a peak, and it's also to change the remote out into an active ground. So let's go ahead and switch over to the relay control mode, and that's done simply by pressing the remote program button for 5 seconds. There you go. Okay, and so now that means that every time I start the engine, so you can see we're engine off right now. I'll go ahead and start the engine. And there you go. It's activated the solenoid and it's joined the batteries together. So every time in a stop-start car, when you come to a stop sign, that engine is going to shut off. So I'm going to shut off the engine. And you can see that the remote output has now come on, and it'll stay like this for however many minutes of delay. By default, there's a 3-minute delay because that assumes a pretty long stoplight on the turn-off delay. But if you want to adjust that, of course you can, but generally in minutes. And then as soon as you start the car again after it's already running, so the auxiliary battery in your sound system doesn't see that starter cranking voltage drop. I'll just go ahead and start the engine again, and now it's joined the batteries up again. And that's it. Very simple to program. Just program the ignition detect for those thresholds, and then just change it over to RCM. By default, it already has a 3-minute turn-off delay, and you can adjust that as needed. So there you have it. That's how you program an IRAD Plus. Really simple, has distinct applications that are all easy to program. And it's got a few other features that if you want to find out more information, please go to wavtech-usa.com. One of those features is the different levels of reset or delete. You can actually just delete the delays. You can just delete the ignition thresholds, or you can do a full factory reset. And there's also another mode that I didn't mention before, which is the remote unlink. And that gives you the ability to unlink the remote output from the ignition output. So that way you can simultaneously use ignition detection for one output and a switch trigger for the second output, and have them totally independent and not linked. So again, check us out at wavtech-usa.com.